Hello, good evening. Tonight we are going to do something super tingly, very relaxing. I'll show you. Yep, I'm going to read to you. And it's another Disney story. I've done a couple in the past, and I think you really like it, so I'll do it again. Now first, you get in your pajamas, get underneath a blanket, and put on some headphones or earbuds. Let's get really cozy for this story, okay? Enjoy. Isabel, imagination, ASMR. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Magical story by Disney. Look. Has depth. Don't know if you can see this, but alright, let's open it up. Look, she's singing. And the birds are keeping her company. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Alright. Long ago, there lived a kind princess named Snow White. Her wicked stepmother, the queen, feared that someday Snow White's beauty would outshine her own. So she forced the princess to dress in rags and work like a servant. But nothing could spoil Snow White's sweet nature. She's happy. Each day, the queen consulted her magic mirror. She always asked the same question. Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And each day the mirror replied, you are the fairest of all. But one morning, the mirror said that Snow White was the most beautiful woman in all the land. The queen flew into a jealous rage. Meanwhile, Snow White attended to her chores and sang a wish into a wishing well. She hoped that that someday soon she would meet a prince and fall in love. Little did she know that a handsome prince had overheard her song. The prince fell in love with the princess instantly. Snow White was shy at first and fled back into the castle. But as the prince sang a love song, she began to fall in love too. He was getting her a serenade. She was on a balcony. So romantic. The next morning, the jealous queen plotted against the princess. She ordered her royal huntsman to take Snow White far into the forest, kill her, and bring back her heart in a box. The huntsman led the princess into the forest, but he could not bring himself to kill her. He told Snow White to hide in the forest, and he took an animal's heart back to the queen instead. This box, this huntsman, the queen looks satisfied. Snow White wandered deep into the forest. She was scared, but some friendly forest animals led her to a little cottage. "Oh, it's adorable," Snow White cried, "just like a doll's house." She tried the door, and it swung open. "Hello? May I come in?" Snow White called, but no one answered. Look, all the animals. Snow White stepped inside the cottage and saw 7 little chairs. She thought that 7 little children must live there, and from the look of this table, 7 untidy little children, she said, holding up a rather smelly sock. Look, here's the sock. "We'll clean the house and surprise them," said Snow White. "Then maybe they'll let me stay." So, with the help of her forest friends, Snow White dusted and cleaned the little cottage. Look, everyone is helping. They're having so much fun. Then she lay across 3 of the tiny beds and fell fast asleep. She must be really tired. Evening came, and the owners of the cottage made their way home. They were 7 dwarfs who worked in diamond mines deep in the heart of the mountain, singing a jolly tune as they marched along. They had no idea of the surprise waiting for them. 7 dwarfs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 little dwarfs. As soon as they entered the cottage, they knew something wasn't quite right. Their home had been cleaned, the floor had been swept, and there was a delicious smell coming from a pot on the fire. "There's dirty work afoot," grumbled the dwarf called Grumpy. seven dwarfs searched the cottage for an intruder. They reached the bedroom just as Snow White was waking up. "Who are you?" they asked. "My name is Snow White," said Snow White. She explained why she was there. Then she asked the little men who they were. The dwarfs told the princess their names, and she easily guessed who was who. They were called Dog, Happy, Sneezy, Sleepy, Bashful, Grumpy, and Dopey. Snow White introduced herself and told the dwarfs about the evil queen. "Please don't send me away," she said. The dwarfs felt sorry for Snow White and agreed to let her stay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That evening, the cottage was filled with music and laughter. After enjoying a delicious dinner cooked by Snow White, the dwarfs sang and danced to welcome the princess to their home. Snow White was so happy that she soon forgot all about her wicked stepmother. Look, she's dancing, smiling. The animals are happy. Only Grumpy is not so happy, but she never really is. Oh, this is a little bit scary. I'll just put my hand over it, okay? Meanwhile, back in the castle, the queen was standing in front of her magic mirror. She asked the question she always asked, but instead of answering as she expected, the mirror replied, "Snow White still lives, the fairest in the land. It's the heart of a pig you hold in your hand." The queen gasped in horror. The huntsman had tricked her. Look. The queen stormed down a winding staircase and through a dark dungeon to a hidden room in the castle. There she found her book of magic spells and used a terrible potion to transform herself into an old woman. Next, she dipped an apple into a bubbling cauldron. One taste of the poisoned apple and the victim's eyes will close forever, she crackled. The only antidote for the queen's spell was love's first kiss. Look. Oh, so scary. Let's put it away. I was always so scared by the witch. The next day, after the dwarves had left for work, Snow White was visited by the disguised queen. The birds and forest animals watched in alarm as kind-hearted Snow White invited the old woman inside in the cottage for a glass of water. They knew the princess was in terrible danger, so they raced to the mines to fetch the dwarves. The queen offered Snow White the poisoned apple. "It's a magic wishing apple," she lied. "Now take the apple, dearie, and make a wish." Snow White took the apple and thought of the handsome prince. "I wish moment later, she fell to the floor. "Now I'll be the fairest in the land," the queen cried. Wicked queen. Look, the apple. As the queen left the cottage, the dwarfs arrived and chased after her. They followed her through the forest and up a mountain. Higher and higher the queen went, until she came to a stop at the edge of a cliff. Look. There was nowhere else to go. Crack! A bolt of lightning struck the ledge where the evil queen stood. Look. The ledge crumbled, and with a shriek, the queen fell, never to be seen again. When the weary dwarfs returned to the cottage and found Snow White lying silent, they were heartbroken. Snow White was so beautiful, even now, that the dwarfs decided to make a bed of gold for her. Day and night, season after season, they watched over her. They're all sad. Look. The animals are sad too. Then, one afternoon, a handsome young man came riding through the forest. He was the prince who had fallen in love with Snow White by the castle well. The handsome prince had searched far and wide for the princess he had met that fateful morning. When he came to the clearing where Snow White lay, he leaned over and kissed her. It was love's first kiss. With a soft sigh, Snow White sat up and rubbed her eyes. The prince shouted with joy and lifted her in his arms. The dwarfs danced and laughed, and the woods rang with calls from the happy forest animals. Snow White was awake. Before she left to begin her new life with the prince, Snow White kissed each of the 7 dwarfs goodbye and promised to visit them soon. Lifting her on his horse, the prince led Snow White to his castle, where they would live happily ever after. Look. The prince in his castle and the horse. And all the happy little dwarfs and forest animals. Thank you to all my subscribers. Thank you for hitting the like button, leaving a comment, and thank you for clicking on the notification bell. And a very special thanks to my Patreon supporters. Click on the link in the description box if you also want to support me on Patreon. Watch my YouTube videos on an app called Tingles. This way